Chapter 5 Mage Graveyard. The organization known as the Imperial Army is one of, by, and for career soldiers who pursue military rationality and nothing else. A classic example of an over-specialized, one-track organization. Perhaps it is a matter of pride in living up to their military reputation. But for better or worse, once a decision has been reached, the Imperial Army is as nimble as can be when it comes to taking action. Eastern Army Command is no exception. After receiving General Zetor's strict orders via the General Staff, Eastern Command's previous intransigence vanished in a heartbeat. Silencing their doubts, the staff officers began transmitting strict orders in General Zetor's name to all Eastern Army units, ordering them to withdraw and occupy new defensive lines. This is no simple retraction. Once a legitimate order is received, all other matters take a back seat. They are to completely abandon the prescribed defensive line and immediately, decisively, implement defensive plan No. 4. While there are some discrepancies among the units, and despite the fact that the orders differ from prior assumptions, they have begun implementing them with relative alacrity. The Imperial Army may be on the brink of exhaustion and suffering massive attrition, but as a military body, they are unshakable, an organization that maintains control. Praiseworthy when it comes to waging war. Withdrawals are generally difficult things to pull off, especially large-scale withdrawals from a front that is one hair away from crumbling. And, yet the Imperial Army has accomplished this feat under incredible time constraints. From an outside perspective, the Imperial Army's level of organization is nearly perfect. The moment the Imperial Army sensed the scale and purpose of the Federation Army's attack, they completely abandoned the idea of stopping it head-on. Jettisoning prior assumptions, without regard for sunk costs, they began a full-scale withdrawal time to the Federation Army's advance, all while a division of mages sowed confusion by pummeling the enemy's rear infrastructure. As a result, the Imperial Army yielded space faster than the Federation Army had presupposed, while also accomplishing their main goal of conserving the main force's strength. Of course, this still took the form of a retreat while being hounded by the enemy. The Empire was running, and the Federation was the one doing the chasing. That said, if the Federation Army had expected the Imperial Field Army to be tied up on the front line in a repeat of the Imperial Army's decisive attack on the Francois Republican Army main force, they were soon disabused of that notion. For an army, movement is attrition. Even infantry tire from walking. Securing water, food, and places to rest is indispensable. Vehicles also require maintenance after a certain amount of use, and fuel has to come from somewhere. The farther one gets from one's center of operations, the greater the problems become. No matter how thorough your logistic structures, an army is always subject to the ravages of distance. While the fleeing side has bases to look forward to, the pursuing side only moves farther from its own. As a result, whether they like it or not, the Federation Army, which is supposedly the pursuing aggressor, will be forced to remember one thing. The Empire's objective is the same as it always has been, a counter. This is the Empire's standard forte. The Federation will be expecting something like the baiting retreat and mobile warfare they experienced during Operation Iron Hammer. On that point, the Federation Army has read General Zetor's intentions almost to a T. This sort of inference requires no creativity, ingenuity, or great leaps of logic. Rather, it is military common sense. The possibility of a counterattack of this sort on the Imperial Army's part was even predicted before Rising Dawn commenced. What if the Imperial Army retreats as the Federation Army's main force advances, then attempts to regroup and counter? The Federation Army had incorporated such possibilities into their plans from the start. It was only by thoroughly crushing any hope of counterattack that the Federation's main goal was achievable. Even the opposing Imperials would likely agree that the Empire is on the back foot, scrambling to craft a sensible response. Even Tanya, with her insight as a career soldier, has calmly accepted this assessment as reasonable. How careless of me to indulge in common sense when I know perfectly well what kind of creature Zetor is. Compensation for that naivete is soon foisted upon me by First Lieutenant Grants while I nibble on some of the chocolate included in the mages' performance rations, which have arrived on time for a change. He has just returned from the capital. I greet my subordinate, going through the formalities and thanking him deeply for carrying my message. Halfway through that process, first, Lieutenant Grant slowly produces a sealed parcel with a letter scribbled on General Staff stationery. "For you," he says, handing over the letter as if placing a live grenade into my hands. "Sealed orders, Colonel," with an accompanying letter, delivered in the homeland by General Zetor. "Please read the letter first." Naturally. "Now then, you said this is from the General. What on earth can it?" As soon as I take the letter and begin to absorb its contents, the rational part of my brain refuses to grasp its meaning, shouting instead that this makes no sense. At the same time, the other half of my brain, used to unreasonable orders and demands, already understood the implications, and immediately ordered a main ballast tank blow at Tanya's heart to keep it from being crushed by the shock. I pick out just one word from the letter's page. "Airborne," I say, cautiously, trying to avoid critical damage to my ego by immediately voicing those 8 letters before my mind could be overloaded. Airborne," I repeat, taking a deep breath and reluctantly facing the news that First Lieutenant Grant has brought me. My subordinate has officially received the full and total approval from General Zetor. By extension, this means High Command also approves. It is excellent news. It truly is. Even if it was to effect an emergency evacuation, Tanya falsified orders. Not only has my superior officer legitimized and pardoned my actions, he is also publicly proceeding with the same course of action. By all rights, this is an outcome to be celebrated. Good news beyond my wildest dreams. What more could I have hoped for? But even with such good news to wash it down, the letter from General Zetor that First Lieutenant Grant has brought is a bitter pill to swallow. "Lieutenant Grant, I wish to confirm something." "Yes, Colonel. This letter, from General Zetor. Are you aware of what it contains?" "Yes, Colonel. We are to cut off enemy lines of communication with a division of mages, a volunteer raid, airborne. Details are within these sealed orders." "Is that correct?" "Yes, Colonel," my subordinate replied in a near mechanical monotone, repeating the phrase as if on loop. Without waiting for further elaboration, I gingerly set the parcel from First Lieutenant Grant down on my desk, as if it might explode at any moment. Honestly, I don't want to open it. Unfortunately, I have no choice. Confirming that the seal is intact and protocol is followed, I have Grant's sign as witness, methodically following the rules for breaking the seal, a small act of escapism for me. Even Tanya can show a human side. From time to time when confronting something I'd rather not face. General Zetor's personal gophers, the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion. Pure bloodshot at the so-called operational plan that the general has brazenly assembled. Deliver mage divisions to each of 3 choke points. I had barely finished reading the objective when a profoundly overwhelming sense of dizziness overtook me. 3 choke points, indeed. Of all the harebrained requests, Zetor is supposed to be one of the few people in the Empire with half a brain, isn't he? How can he seriously consider such fantasies? Put pressure on the Federation Army's fuel and ammo, thereby triggering their operational limits. Deal a heavy blow to the Federation Army, who are ranging far from their center of operations, at minimal cost. I understand the logic of it. Any shred of military common sense is enough to grasp the general's intentions. Apply pressure to choke points in the enemy's rear and cut off their lines of communication. Using the main force to envelop space while attacking supply lines is almost textbook, and it feels painfully familiar. After all, this closely resembles Operation Iron Hammer, which the Imperial Army initiated on May 5 of last year. To be blunt, it seems to have been lifted entirely from the previous operation in places, betraying the hastily constructed substitute beneath the surface. But regarding the objective, the idea is so far out there that, as one of the officers involved in Iron Hammer, even that overly reckless and dangerous gamble seems rock solid by comparison. And that operation, in my opinion, was practically all risk. Last year, the Imperial Army still had armored divisions active in the East. How many tanks could the Eastern Army muster now? Nearly all the surplus was either sunbathing in Ildoa or recovering from sunburn. Furthermore, during Iron Hammer, support was available for the troops dropping in to screen the enemy's rear. With the armored divisions gone, now, could they still expect such assistance? I shove all the chocolate scattered on the desk into my mouth and cross my arms. Without sugar, I might become lightheaded again. You have some too, I say, tossing some high-calorie chocolate. Designed for aerial mages toward a dumbfounded First Lieutenant Grants. As I consider the mess we're in, armor is out of the question, and, as if that weren't enough, air superiority is a dream beyond a dream. Last year, we scrambled together air assets from throughout the Empire to secure a modicum of air superiority for high maneuver warfare. That was a true, deliberate attack. But today, the Empire no longer has that capability. General Zetor completely used up the Air Force in Ildoa, down to the last drop. As a result, we can forget about not only air supremacy, which is a major prerequisite for airborne operations, but air superiority as well. In fact, it is doubtful we can even secure a decent enough number of large transports. But it must be precisely because he is aware of these issues that General Zetor has picked out us mages, who can be effective even in small numbers, instead of standard airborne infantry for this operation. He probably expects us to use our firepower and defensive capabilities to make up for the Empire's numerical disadvantage. The logic, at least, seems sound, that is, if you ignore the question of where we are supposed to scrounge up so many mages from. Would it be possible, when under present circumstances, even the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion who report directly to the General Staff, has been told not to expect any replenishment? What contortions will Imperial Army officials have to perform to produce new airborne divisions? Besides, even if that issue were solved by some miracle, the worst part is, we've already done this exact same thing before. I mutter, despite knowing First Lieutenant Grants can hear my complaints. This plan, which appears to have lifted its basic framework from Operation Iron Hammer, is known by both sides. The world learned then how the Empire behaves. Our opponent is now inoculated against such tactics. It's foolish to expect it to be just as successful now. The enemy is more powerful than before. And we are weaker. We would be staking everything on an operation with an even slimmer chance of success than our last gamble, reusing old tactics and hoping things go our way. Even assuming it is the only way, this plan is overly reckless and ambitious. It is ridiculously rash. Air mobility, and a large-scale bounding advance with strategic units. The word, impossible, nearly escaped my lips before I remembered my position. First Lieutenant Grants was present. I rack my brain for a more diplomatic phrase. An expenditure. To be honest, the mages will be massacred. The idea is to buy time and exchange it for victory. However, even if we hold out until we are completely annihilated, the chance of operational success is far from decent. According to the sealed documents, we're supposed to drop into the enemy rear and cut off supply routes for as long as possible. Not until follow-on troops arrive, but for as long as possible. Perhaps my stellar experience as a field officer lets me read between the lines. No support will be coming. In short, there will be no relief troops. After dropping into enemy territory and using our own strength to apply pressure, these dropped units, isolated and alone, will need to withstand battering from all sides as we wait for the Federation armies' main force to fall apart from lack of supplies. The exchange might be favorable, but it is an exchange of Imperial Mage divisions for the Federation's main force. We may as well have been told to go out there and die. I considered refusing, but I had only just indebted myself to Zetor's due to the falsified orders. I shut my eyes reflexively and prepare for the worst. I glanced at First Lieutenant Grants. Thank you for your hard work, I said. Then, as if afraid someone might overhear, I charged him with a task. Call in Major Weiss and First Lieutenant Serebryakov, and personally ensure that no one else, no matter who they may be, approaches the Operation Center. Upon being called to the room, Major Weiss was confronted by an unexpected sight. Major, there you are. Would you care for some coffee? It was his superior officer, sitting on one of the wooden crates in the Operation Center, holding a coffee cup in one hand with a grin on her face. Not only that, but she offered coffee and chocolate, calm as a breeze, like something out of one of the cafes in the capital. Go on, take a load off. It's real coffee. See, she was inviting him to sit down to tea here on the front line, where blood and steel waited around every corner. Dumbfounded, Weiss noticed that First Lieutenant Serebryakov, someone who had known the lieutenant colonel longer than he had, was already there, biting into a piece of chocolate. What? It's good. Oh, well then. Weiss wasn't sure what to say, but oddly, the tension was broken. Before he knew it, he found himself settling onto the wooden crate offered in place of a chair. Please, before we get down to what I wanted to talk about, have something sweet to eat, and some coffee, as well. Try to relax a little, if you can. This is something you'll want to be seated for, I promise. Explained Weiss's superior officer in a soothing tone. With the empire at war as it was, coffee and chocolate had become luxury items beyond compare. After this lavish feast, Major Weiss settled in and prepared for the worst. If his superior officer had gone to such lengths, the problem was obviously big. I volunteer. Whatever it is, just give the order. Major Weiss. The commander looked stumped. While she usually exuded the air of a battle-hardened veteran, in that moment, her expression seemed more suited to her age. Major Weiss was amused, but he relegated that amusement to the back of his mind. This oddly formal banquet had been prepared by their superior officer because she had something difficult to tell them. It was going to be troublesome, that was for sure. Having his nose pressed to the grindstone in the East for far too long, Weiss had seen his share of sorrows and could already smell what was coming. I was prepared for this from the beginning. I was told what kind of work was in store for us even before our battalion was assigned to the Salamander Kampfgruppe. I am ready to volunteer for any mission, no matter how difficult. Lieutenant Colonel de Gorekov glanced toward First Lieutenant Serebryakov. Weiss knew from that subtle movement what was being asked of Serebryakov. The lieutenant colonel wanted to know if she felt the same. Simultaneously, she extended a lifeboat to the first lieutenant. Serebryakov was free to object if she wished, but nothing was said aloud. If she disagreed, she could simply remain silent, a thoughtful gesture from their commander, allowing subordinates to dissent without confrontation. Weiss remained quiet out of consideration for the colonel's feelings. After all, it was none of his business. First Lieutenant Serebryakov hummed softly. For hazardous journeys, small pay, and long months of gunfire and strife. These were words Weiss held dear. Brave, noble words. Words for heroes. But reality had made it painfully clear that there was no room for romanticism on the battlefield. Yet what if a unit that still clung to such grand words were to take center stage? I think you've gotten the wrong impression. We've been a flight pair since the Rhine. Of course I intended to volunteer, Colonel. I see. Yes, you do. The lieutenant colonel muttered softly, then turned her eyes toward Weiss. Are you sure you're both prepared for this? Absolutely, they both said. When I volunteered for this battalion, I was lured by the thought of heroism. I finally see that heroism is simply how you go through life. Colonel, you understand that safe return is unlikely. Weiss was certain that even if he confessed fear and wished to rescind his commitment, Lieutenant Colonel de Gorekov would not chide him. Her face was sincere as she asked again if he truly wished to volunteer. If he had been certain before, he was doubly so now. This was his last chance to escape what would be a ludicrous mission. Weiss shrugged lightly and spoke, trying to verbalize his feelings. This is war. Whatever is necessary should be ordered. Before I make this request, I'd like to ask one more time, well, Lieutenant Serebryakov, what do you say? Please, speak openly now. What do I say? The lieutenant colonel's adjutant, who had been busy shoveling chocolate into her mouth and gulping down coffee, cocked her head to the side. Lieutenant Colonel de Gorekov stared back, on tenterhooks. Then Weiss suddenly noticed how unusual this exchange was. The lieutenant colonel had already asked the adjutant if she wished to change her mind once and was now asking her again. Was she hesitating to acknowledge this departure, urging the first lieutenant to reconsider? Who but Lieutenant Colonel de Gorekov would show such concern in the face of adversity? Weiss smiled uncomfortably despite himself. Colonel, I'm sorry, but no, Major, do not interrupt. Well, Lieutenant Serebryakov, are you set on volunteering as well, like Major Weiss? Speak openly. I'm sorry, but why are you asking me this? Why? Yes, why? First Lieutenant Serebryakov nodded, holding her coffee. Confused. I thought I made myself clear. During the Rhine, I decided to go where you went. I don't know why you're asking me to rethink things now, after all we've been through. An expression of blank surprise appeared on their superior officer's face. Ha ha ha. Weiss couldn't help a belly laugh, even in the presence of A senior officer. You see. What did I say? As Lieutenant Colonel Dugarekov's adjutant, First Lieutenant Serebryakov had always covered her back since the Rhine. It was fine for Dugarekov to show concern, but it must have felt bewildering for Serebryakov to receive it. When it comes to interpersonal relations, our superior officer can be awkward in the most unexpected ways. Grinning uncomfortably, Weiss suddenly realized something. Come to think of it, this great hero standing before him was, in fact, several years his junior. Though she appeared perfect, she was still human. Savoring this pleasant revelation, Weiss adopted a more somber expression as he spoke. I'm sorry, Colonel, but we're well past the need for you to question our commitment. Our minds were made up long ago. Then I guess I'm completely surrounded by warmongers, said the Lieutenant Colonel, exasperated. Weiss was about to say, birds of a feather flock together, but first Lieutenant Serebryakov beat him to it with a better rejoinder. No, there is one exception. Oh? Asked Lieutenant Colonel Dugarekov, turning her eyes toward First Lieutenant Serebryakov as if to ask whom she meant. Can't you guess? Said the First Lieutenant with a chuckle before revealing, the only normal person in Lurgen Kampfgruppe is Colonel Lurgen. Of course, Colonel Lurgen. Weiss clapped his hands in agreement. Yes, that's true. Colonel Lurgen is perfectly respectable. The three laughed heartily. Once they had released the tension, feeling warm and cheerful once more, Weiss took the written order that Lieutenant Colonel Dugarekov offered and skimmed it, letting the warmth seep into his chest. This is quite a tall order. Is that all you have to say? You're very restrained, Major. Once you resign yourself to something, what else is there to say? It was settled. Weiss heard it clearly. There was a snap as the atmosphere in the room settled. Let us prepare for our fates. A moment ago, our superior officer might have seemed to be her age. But now with her aura as she gives orders, no one could doubt she is every bit the grizzled officer who earned the title of White Silver on the battlefield. It is time to surpass Iron Hammer, and it shall be done by our hand. To be clear, I'm very confused. Why did no one refuse? The world can be a very strange place at times. Maybe this is one of those unsolvable mysteries. But if no other options remain, I am still determined to do what I can to avoid the worst outcome. Thus, with General Zetor's order, the on-site commanders consent. The agreement of on-site personnel, and no opposition to be found, the airborne drop, the kind of military gamble that makes one question everyone's sanity, was approved without much issue. Approved and set into motion. The Imperial Army is truly gluttonous for war. Many doubts remain, but there is no time to stand still. We must each carry out our respective duties to perfection. There was something strange about that time. One Imperial mage described the moment vividly. They had been flying continuously for who knows how many hours. Who even knew what day it was, carrying out relentless ground attacks against the Federation Army. It was the battlefield, and everyone was desperate for sleep. Please, just 5 minutes. And then the sight of their superior officer shouting angrily, there is no time for sleep. Resupply. While you fly, we marshal again immediately, as she shoved high-grade chocolate into the exhausted mage's hands. Ladies, gentlemen, eat, sleep. Sleep the sleep of death until you're woken up. They would have given a small fortune for a few winks, but they suddenly felt wide awake. We have permission to sleep. Sir, don't forget, we've been told not to expect sleep again for the foreseeable future. They scarfed down the chocolate they could, quickly shut their eyes, and plunged into a world of dreams, eager to catch every last second of slumber. Meanwhile, magic officers blinked with eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, recalling the orders the Eastern Chief Inspector had barked. Attention all commanders, curse the fact that you are commanders. There is work to be done. It is time for a commanders' meeting. You have 1 hour first to take a nap. They had emergency orders, so being allowed to sleep, even for just an hour, was a huge indulgence. These orders must have been big. As soon as the inspector gave them the go-ahead, the thoroughly exhausted officers tumbled to the ground like dominoes or so many rag dolls and quickly began to snore. And then, exactly 1 hour later, it felt as though they were being shaken awake mere moments after drifting off. With their bodies still crying out for sleep, these officers dragged themselves to the operation center, some even using their orbs to forcibly stimulate their minds. That was the day they learned what their Roles would be, of course, other than those of the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion, the Mage. Commanders gathered together in the Combat Operations Center erupt into shouts once they are informed. Unbelievable. Has the general lost his mind? Taken hold ground with our current forces. But we can't have more than 200. This is armchair stupidity. The choke points will be defended. They clearly haven't accounted for how much AA fire will be on the ground. We don't have enough supplies. Do they expect us to do this only with what we capture? There are far too few mages. In other words, Imperial soldiers do seem to have the ability to object. Unfortunately for them, they are still Imperial soldiers. I respond succinctly. I understand your objections. If you wish, I will record them in writing. However, the order has already been given. Furthermore, mission pay has been issued. An order is an order, as the old adage goes. The commanders fall into meek silence. Some even cast optimistic glances my way. Pay, you say? They'll be beefing up forces. This is the replenishment we've been waiting for. Gentlemen, there is no need to attempt the mission with a single division. The brass will be providing more hands. The higher-ups will pull a few divisions out of their magic hat, it seems. I snicker. The others don't seem to get the joke and begin prying me with very serious questions. How many reinforcements could they expect? What are the numbers? 2 additional divisions, from the homeland. What? I'm sorry, did you say 2? Asks one magic officer, leaning forward in disbelief. I nod, understanding his sentiment. They are serious about this in the capital. They plan to squeeze out 2 divisions worth of mages. In response to hearing how many soldiers the higher-ups promised, I am immediately met with a flurry of follow-up questions. How are the divisions constituted? What is their actual order of battle? 3 regiments per division, with 3 standard companies per regiment. Together with the division already present, that should make 9 regiments. Colonel de Garekaf, if the regiments are staffed to full capacity, that will mean close to 1,000 mages. Yes, I say with a nod. Assuming full strength. Colonel, with all due respect, when you say full strength, I wonder if there is something you aren't telling us. You're not wrong, I admit. At face value, that would be enough. Forced to overrun even Moskva, as flimsy as its defenses are now. That's assuming we were willing to make it a one-way trip, obviously. Even the mage division under my command, already in the east, only has about 200 mages at most, leaving us at roughly 2/3 strength. However, according to the general, they plan to wrangle together full numbers by any means necessary. So we have a promissory note for numbers at least, I say, grinning. With all respect, says First Lieutenant Grants, interrupting, there is a question as to whether the mages they send will be useful. Do you have a reason for saying that, Lieutenant Grants? Yes, Colonel, I had the opportunity to trade pleasantries with the mages of Capital Air Defense, and it seems that even the ability to fly straight earns one a gold star these days. His words seemed to fill many in the room with unease. They turned their eyes toward me and Grants, alarmed. Lieutenant Grants, I was not there to witness this. Please share your practical concerns. Of course, he says, continuing. From what I observed, it appeared that merely flying in formation over capital airspace was enough for a mage to pass with top marks. Based on the level of skill I witnessed, I would even be concerned about their ability to maintain airways and advance to the target. If what you say is true, they are sending us hindrances, not reinforcements. We'll be stuck carrying around mages who can't fly like sacks, said a liaison officer from another regiment, frowning. I smile uncomfortably, reminding him, you forget, officer. This is an airborne operation, but our transports can barely reach the destinations. Even if we bring them all the way up to the front. That's true if we were just talking about the range of the transport planes. Are you imagining something like V-1 long-range rockets? But would we even have enough to move full divisions? A sensible objection, indeed. Yet it seems even magic officers, who should understand Imperial Army generals at least to some degree, cannot foresee what is coming. I groan. This crazy plan of General Zetor's might just work after all. Colonel, I shrug. Your objections have unexpectedly made me realize that General Zetor's plan may actually have a chance of success. The officers look at me blankly, and not just the liaison officers. Scrounged up from the other units, even First Lieutenant Serebryakov who has been serving under Tanya the longest, reacts similarly. I see first. Lieutenant Grantz's expression cloud over slightly. Lieutenant Grantz, I'm sorry, but it's General Zetor we are talking about, after all. Are you saying he has something up his sleeve? Bingo, I say, applauding his instincts. It is fortunate for our side that you are not with Federation Army Command. Here, I say, tapping the map on the table. Everyone, take a look at the map. Do you see our destinations? Of course, they reply. I grin. All 3 targets are clearly outside the combat operation range of the nearest air transport unit. No disagreement there. But what if our heavy transport planes were to make the trip one way? Would they be within range then? What? But that would mean large transport planes are incredibly precious, high-value assets for the Imperial Army. They are the exact kind of asset that you would expect to be well defended under normal circumstances. You certainly wouldn't treat them as disposable. Gambling with such precious equipment on a mere airborne operation is jaw-dropping. And, yet, it won't need to make the round trip if we simply dispose of it in the end, will it? The liaison officers freeze, taken aback. I can't be serious. As someone under my direct command, Major Weiss finds it easier to speak up. While other officers stare, he asks the question on everyone's mind. We're going to dispose of transport planes. They're planes, not gliders. Major Weiss's opinion is very sensible. Very sensible indeed. Does everyone agree with Major Weiss's thinking? They nod. I decide to explain. The truth is that General Zetor is likely following a strategy of selection and concentration. There is no need to be bound by common sense. One must be flexible, when necessary. In the end, whether gliders or transport planes, it all comes down to cost and return. The logical conclusion is clear. Even a large expenditure is rational when the benefit is commensurate. I explain further, if we can break the Federation Army's strategic offensive here, it would be a significant boon for the Empire, even at the cost of dozens of transport planes. This is a bold and practical decision by the general, and I fully agree. The transports may be valuable equipment, but from a strategic standpoint, the expenditure is entirely valid. Of course, I carefully omit what will happen afterward, though I can already picture it. The Imperial Army's Air Transport Division will likely never recover. Even so, in terms of cost and effect, General Zetor's choice is exceptionally rational. From a national policy perspective, even vital strategic military assets are mere collateral against the state's survival. I am also aware of another sad logical necessity. Not only will strategic transport planes and strategic projection capabilities vanish from the Empire, but the humans deployed into such a battlefield, where even their transports are expected to be lost, will likely be going on a one-way trip as well. I'm sorry, but with an operation like this. Yes, I interrupt, finishing Major Weiss's thought. The mages and transports alike will likely be lost. I decide to get ahead of the news myself. It leaves a better impression if Tanya steps up as their boss and doesn't hide the bad news than if she appears as a senior officer reluctant to admit the truth. It is a god-awful truth. But it is my duty as an officer to explain this to my troops. We are to be carried one way by transport plane, to keep the commies busy until the operation is complete, and then we are free to fly away afterward, leaving someone else to clean up the mess. In short, the operation calls for us to be thrown directly into the middle of fierce fighting and then to narrowly escape, or embrace, death. Many men will die, won't they? Said one liaison officer grimly. I responded with a pained expression. The loss of new recruits who are not accustomed to long-range flight will likely be immense, and with repeated battles, even veterans who have survived this long are at risk. Worst of all, the risk for even Tanya will be high. But sadly, among the sacrifices available to the army at the moment, this is the one with the lowest cost. As you already know, gentlemen, at the moment, the Eastern Army has lost much of its heavy equipment. Likely, the only units capable of mobile counterattack now are the armored forces in Ildoa. But unfortunately, there is little hope that the tanks will return from Ildoa for us. Although I don't say it aloud, it would be better to think of the tanks as a force in name only. After all, even movement puts strain on tanks. There is no such thing as a maintenance-free machine. It's not like Such hardware can just roll into battle after battle, in tip-top shape, without any outfitting in between. Even if the armored forces did all they could to quickly redeploy to the east, there are bigger problems for the tanks than just mass mobilization. Without maintenance, the tanks would be useless. The only vehicles they might be able to drag straight here are the pillboxes. In other words, from a strategic point of view, whatever other concerns remain, the armored forces will not make it on time. Thus, the only piece on the board for General Zedor right now is the exhausted Eastern Army main force, meaning that General Zedor will likely be hungry for a counterattack that is as impromptu as possible. Applying a debuff to the Federation Army forces will inevitably prove indispensable. In that light, the military rationale of cutting off supply lines is clear. The proviso of course being, if that can be done. It is a monumental task. The fact that they have gone as far as concentrated deployment of several mage divisions to strongarm a solution goes to show just how momentous this is supposed to be. Thus, I continue, delivering a stirring appeal. We have a battle-hardened division, and the pick of new recruits. Multiple units in multiple divisions. In other words, a motley crew of survivors and scraps. But we also have our pride, I roar. That is what makes us magic. Officers, gentlemen, together, you and I will need to utilize everything at our disposal to whip these hastily shipped reinforcements into 3 respectable aerial mage divisions, into a force to be reckoned with on the Eastern Front. We have no choice, and so we will do it. We will do it because we have to. It is foolish, circuitous logic. How miserable it feels to have to inspire people with histrionics like these before sending them into battle. It is a middle manager's nightmare. But nightmare or not, I continue my appeal to the magic officers, even if that appeal is a farce. We can do it, even with the 3 aerial mage divisions available. We will cut off the Federation Army's logistics, just as we did during Iron Hammer. If we can deprive the enemy's main force of oxygen, we will win. We can win. Victory is in sight. It is all smooth talk to persuade others, even if just on a surface level, that there is meaning to what we are about to do. It's not just recklessness. The reality is that we, and we alone, can save the Empire. I stare into each of their eyes as I make my appeal. For love of country, for honor, for professional pride, anything will do. So long as they can get over the danger and work as one, I will administer whatever medicine is needed, in any amount, no matter the recommended dose. It is we who will protect the Empire, who will protect the world, from the nefarious hands of the commies. If you are soldiers, now is the time. This is your stage. I grin a bellicose grin. I pause for a moment, swaggering, as if I cannot contain my excitement, leading them away from their own cowardice. And as preparation for this operation, I wait until the moment the words sit heaviest, and then, bam! Punch my fist into my hand. We must continue immediate operations against enemy supply lines. Ongoing ground attacks, while we prepare for the volunteer raid. What? We're expected to continue conducting interdiction even while preparing to assault their choke points. The officers look stunned. I begin speaking before they can complain that this is asking for too much. We cannot ignore the risk of officers aware of this information being captured. As a result, as of now, you gentlemen are prohibited from taking to the field. Your soldiers, however, absolutely must continue to fly missions. The relief at knowing they will not be out on the front, and the guilt they feel at thrusting their men into danger in their place. It sometimes takes a moment for people to process their own feelings. Enough time, perhaps, for them to miss their chance to raise objections. After all, the organizational culture known as the Imperial Army has successfully instilled into the officers the standard military principle that once a course is decided upon, it absolutely must be followed through. Now then, gentlemen, it is simple. Have your men go conduct as many airstrikes as possible while you work yourselves to the point of death here in preparation for the airborne operation. Nap no more than is needed for survival. That is how we do both. January 20th, Unified Year 1928, the East. Supply lines are the lifelines of an army. Armies in all times and all places have attempted to cut off their enemies' supplies, dreaming of encirclement and annihilation. The Imperial Army's Hans von Zetor is one more figure in a long history of generals who have attempted to cut the enemy's supply lines. And, like his forebears, he knows that this is easier said than done. In that sense, General Zetor is a veteran. The general has succeeded, on multiple occasions in striking back against major enemy offensives, carried out by a massive force, even when his own force was depleted. Precisely by targeting the enemy's logistics. That is evidence of his might. As a strategist, of the knowledge he has amassed as an expert in logistics. And of the charlatan skills that made him an enemy of the world. In the end, however, numbers talk. That's why concentration of force and its careful application are all important. So long as the garden variety approach remains viable, a dull, textbook, garden variety approach will be the most sure. But when it comes to a gamble, when a depleted force attempts a miracle, such as attacking enemy logistics in order to cause an upset, then nothing is certain. Either way, as ardent believers in necessity, the Empire has no choice but to target the Federation's logistics. And so, in pursuit of necessity, the Empire has used every ounce of its strength to rally its mages together. When you look at the situation that way, it almost sounds gallant. On the ground, however, there is little gallantry to expect beyond the gallantry of words. We on the ground have our fill of sadness, instead. The Imperial mages, scraped together by fair or by foul, do in fact measure 3 divisions in total. Considering that even the recent large scale, what might even be called unprecedented, mage air strikes decisively carried out in the Eastern Inspector's name was only done with a single mage division, these numbers very well may represent every last mage the Empire was able to muster. Naturally, if the army had tried to go about things the fair and proper way, they would have never been able to produce such numbers. As a result, what we are left with is far from fair and proper. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha, what can you do but laugh? I can't help myself. Considering the situation, I was prepared to see a few young, green crops mixed in with the yield. When General Zetor started mentioning that they could hardly pull instructors from the training units, well, that was exactly what I began to expect. But I had expected at least some restraint. Forget about instructors and early graduates, it looks like these mages might have still been in training. Had they shipped off anyone they could find with even a smidgen of magical aptitude to the front. That's right, let's give the kiddies a chaperone and let them out for the day. Who cares if this little field trip happens to be to the very front? It will be the experience of a lifetime for them, at least. You know what they say, the picnic isn't over until it's over. Tanya's mind fills with memories of the peaceful, modern world. After seeing countless battlefields, I thought I knew better by this point than to relax before making it back home, safe and sound, but this incident has taught me something new. For better or for worse, Tanya is able to compartmentalize everything in its place. Whether new recruits or trainees, they are still soldiers at the end of the day, meaning, legally speaking, nothing prevents them from being sent into battle, although there might be a difference between volunteer and conscripted soldiers, as far as I am concerned as the one utilizing them. That is someone else's problem. At the end of the day, however, I am a creature of self-interest. I rub the corners of my eyes as I glance at the other divisions. The Empire is determined to drive me absolutely mad. I know I shouldn't say something like that in my position, but I suppose I just wasn't able to keep my true feelings from slipping out. And who are those men over there? Disabled veterans. There are a few small clusters of men among the ranks who are so advanced in age that one might expect the Empire to send soldiers to the front who are missing a limb or two next. As long as they were mages, that is. Digarekaf, Lieutenant Colonel, I see you've moved up in the world. Is that Katianan? Warrant Officer Katianan. Warrant Officer Anlik Katianan, a former subordinate, evacuated from the Rhine front due to disability, I believe around Unified Year 1925, but if I remember correctly, Katianan had retired. Didn't you leave the army after getting food poisoning from a potato? Well, yes, that was what kicked it off. But according to the doctor, my liver had stopped working right due to a sustained buildup of food poisoning. So it wasn't just the potato, then. Well, a sign of the times, I guess. I ran into trouble and had to retire. But I was contacted by the army again later. As unlucky as he had been, at least he was able to retire thanks to his golden ticket injury. But it is just like the Empire, sweatshop that it is, too. Pull the poor unfortunate man out of retirement anyway. When did you return to your current post? I came back as an instructor only recently. I thought I was just going to be spending my days drilling that second-rate program they now tout as extreme hands-on training into the rookies' heads. I never dreamed they'd actually send me into combat again, he adds, muttering softly. How about the trainees? What is their actual skill level? Going by flight time alone, they've had over 200 hours. I cock my head in surprise at this unexpected figure. While 200 hours is still far too little by frontline standards, it is not too terrible considering the state of total war we find ourselves in nowadays. It all depends on the curriculum. But as far as flying goes, at least, it sounds as if we might just meet a minimum level of standards. I'm surprised, with General Zetor's blunt approach to conscription. When I heard trainees would be included, I was expecting to see some men with just a few dozen hours of flight time. Unbelievably, it looks like the general may have actually scraped together something useful for us. I am just beginning to smile at this pleasant surprise when a frown appears on the older mage's face and I realize I am mistaken somehow. I purse my lips. Colonel, are you aware of the style of training carried out these days? Warrant Officer Katyanan asks, lowering his voice. I honestly shake my head no. I do not have many connections with the rear, although I wish I did. I know they follow a program of accelerated orientation these days. With such training, I imagine many things are simplified, but, well, you tell me. Simplified is one way to put it. Basically, we've adopted the Federation approach. What? The Federation approach? I'm not sure I heard him right. Or maybe I just don't want to hear him. The Federation approach to training, which mixes like oil and water with Imperial Army mage tactics. They've decided that the most efficient, reliable way to transform a bunch of amateurs, who don't even know how to spell the word mage yet, into an effective fighting force, is to adopt the Federation's approach. Morons. The word slips out naturally, before I can stop myself. Don't they know that runs completely counter to the design concept of our orbs? Our troops have average defensive shells at best, and they want us to use them the way the Federation uses theirs. We'll be left with a mountain of corpses on our hands. Imperial-style orbs value mobility. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. That is the crux of the Imperial approach. Federation-style orbs value durability. As firm as a mountain, with the firepower of a volcano. It isn't that one way is better than the other, but the ideas are just completely juxtaposed. And naturally, the way the troops are utilized differs as well, just like the design concept behind the orbs mages are equipped with. As a result, while the Empire does aim for a high-low mix, even its most budget orbs have been designed according to the presumption that they will be utilized as part of the higher end of the spectrum. The idea of using Imperial Army mage equipment outside those parameters to hold ground out of sheer stubborn persistence, like the Federation, that would be as ridiculous as using an F1 race car to tow a truck. Obviously the equipment would be fatally unsuited to the task. This method is faster though, says Warrant Officer Katyanan reluctantly, as I stand there in stunned disbelief. So they simplified training for time's sake. Of course, I think, finally understanding. By focusing on just defensive shells and flying formulas, and assuming no activation of optical deception. Formulas are switching between multiple formulas, they would probably be able to cut out a lot of the classroom time. If they cut out time spent studying various book subjects and just focused on drill flight at first, it wouldn't be impossible to drastically simplify previous training and reach 200 hours of flight in that time, would it? However, the price paid would be great. Which is better, dying because you can't fly, or dying because you can? Asks Warrant Officer Katyanan, hitting the issue uncomfortably on the nose. The aerial mages of the past were flying combat experts. Today, with this sped-up training, freshly minted mages are simply amateurs who know how to fly. To be blunt, inserting soldiers like this into battle will be an unspeakable waste of human resources. First of all, the fact that we can't categorically dismiss such recklessness out of hand is a clear sign the army is on its last legs. But, when it comes to Tanya's self-preservation, I am not willing to compromise one iota. That is defeatist talk, warrant officer. The water back in the capital must not have suited you. I am like you, Colonel. Like me, I feel much more at ease on the front lines. I am a little puzzled by Warrant Officer Katyanan's peculiar sensibilities, but choose to respect his personal opinion and remain silent. After all, there are all sorts of people out there. It is probably better to respect their freedom to think whatever they like. However, I do wish to relieve him of this notion that Tanya herself is one such person. I wish to correct a misapprehension you seem to be suffering from. I have the utmost respect for the busybodies who poke their noses into our business from the safety of the rear. It is only thanks to them that we continue to fight. Speaking of which, I would be thrilled to do such work myself. But there is no point making a fuss about that now. It is not like Warrant Officer Katyanan is in a position to get Tanya a cushy job in the rear. All the same, as someone with the sensibilities of a responsible member of society, I never miss an opportunity to point out how well suited Tanya would be to a position on the back lines. Seeing the new recruits gives me ideas. I think I would rather like to teach myself. My constant appeal to common sense seems to have left a deep impression on the other man. Thank you for saying that, although I hope to lose as few of my pupils as possible on this mission. I'm sorry. All I can say is that we will try our best. After all, considering the kind of battlefield we are heading into, even you and I will have to prioritize our survival. Of course, wishing each other well, I resist the urge to sigh. These new pawns are all rookies. Even their equipment is only what could be readily scrounged up. They must have turned the warehouses upside down to mobilize every last fossil on the shelves, and it still hadn't been enough. It looks like they have even appropriated display pieces, what could be better called historical memorabilia, from the museums. Out of the museums and straight to the battlefields. Forget about planting seeds for tomorrow's harvest, we're now dismantling the monuments of yesterday. We are living in historical times. A truly glorious sight to behold. What we're facing now is a task so difficult it could cause even veterans of the past to throw in the towel in despair. As my complaint dissipates in the empty air, I grasp my dangling Elenium Arms Type 95 assault computation orb in hand. The day is likely coming when I will have to rely on this device again. Damn it all, but there is no room to be picky when it comes to survival. Creating disarray in the rear using 3 mage divisions. Securing local superiority through concentration and careful selection. General Zetor showed no qualms in committing everything he had. Was this massive commitment made with a long-term perspective in mind? Experts have argued the point for ages. More than a few have whispered that, formidable though he might have been, perhaps, at that point in time, General Zetor was thinking with the mindset of a talented army commander. As one leading authority pointed out, General Zetor's experience in central military administration may have been extensive. However, that experience was largely as a strategist in the East. General Rudersdorf had previously been in charge of the overarching matters. Intel taking Rudersdorf's place after his sudden death, General Zetor's experience in making ends meet with the forces available had, on an operational level, been limited. Perhaps he had still been thinking with the mentality of an area commander, quick to use whatever was at his disposal. There are many theories on this matter, including no small number that refute such arguments and see General Zetor's choice as a decisive strategic judgment, made with the mentality that, even if it were to bring pain tomorrow, this commitment was a necessary step in order to survive long enough to feel that pain. However, there is one thing that many from later generations acknowledge, and that is that his victory was massively Pyrrhic. The mages were a sleight of hand, and the almighty General Zetor, unable to resist his instincts as a soldier, lost a great number of them in his relentless pursuit of victory. Some even say, when viewing the issue from a bird's eye view, that the tide of the war was decided right then and there. The Empire won a massive, temporary victory, while also sealing its fate of ultimate, bitter defeat. In that moment, the mages of the Empire stood at the pinnacle of the world. They took the glittering center stage and, through incessant bloodshed, wrested victory from the earth by planting it with their own bleached corpses and cries of resentment. The aerial mages of the Imperial Army won the battle, and, for all intents and purposes, died out. Hence, what the world now knows. The utter, incomparable terror of a Mage on the brink of death. We are the aerial mages of the Empire. No one can stand against us. The mages threw themselves into that battle with utter ferocity, as if flying into the very dusk in which Minerva's owl spreads its wings. A battle that heralded the end of their age, etching their mark upon the world. At the very end, before flying off toward Valhalla, while friendly forces are out there fighting a bloody, gruesome war, as serious as can be, I lay napping in a rear base, roll over, wake up, and immediately look for chocolate. Naturally, it is only real, high-grade chocolate. None of that cheap stuff. For me, I munch on the luxury chocolate provided by the General Staff office, with a richly fragrant coffee, not only real, but also freshly roasted. In one hand, I grab yet another honey-laden biscuit. Oh, I almost forgot. I fit one of the sugary biscuits in my other hand. Restraint, frugality, keep those stingy words to yourself. So what if we are at war out there? So what if the soldiers, working in shifts, don't even have a hot meal? Who cares? For now, I get to savor the hot stew, full of rich, hefty chunks of meat. Yes, finally, satisfied with food in my belly, I pile into the airplane and set off on a midnight flight. From that description alone, it sounds like we are about to take an elegant journey across friendly skies. How scandalous. Perhaps some high-minded folks out there might be tempted, morally speaking, to decry such thoughts, to which I gladly invite them to join us on this trip. After all, this may as well be our last supper. The fully armed and outfitted soldiers have been provided this little bit of consideration by the base's storekeepers before they depart on a one-way nighttime flight from which there is almost no hope of return. So if one were tempted to criticize such a thing as a luxury, I say to them, perhaps you are the one who needs to practice better restraint. I am still entertaining these thoughts as the transport, packed full of soldiers, takes off without issue. The marriage of pilot and machine is a marvelous thing, I mutter softly, impressed. Taking off at night is no easy task at the best of times. And in a stodgy, jumbo transport plane, laden with cargo, additionally, the surface of the runway is hardly in good repair. A pilot capable of taking off smoothly in such a heavy transport plane under these conditions must be a veteran of rare proportions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking, Air Force First Lieutenant Hans Schultz. We are currently circling blind over base air space. According to reports from observation planes, cloud cover to our destination is at a 7. The pilot, who hails from the Imperial Army 472nd Transport Wing, pauses for a moment before continuing. Control is giving us the flashing signal. All planes have taken off successfully. We are currently pulling into formation. We've now reached the scheduled time, so as much as it irks my goat, if crew would prepare for hijack, please. The pilot strangely stresses the word irk as he speaks over the intercom, causing the mages on board to burst out into laughter. I can appreciate this breed of professional humor. Ha ha, gentlemen, it seems our poor pilot is angry. Major Weiss, Lieutenant Serebryakov, follow me. It's time to hijack the plane. Lieutenant Grants, you come as well. As I enter the narrow cockpit with my second-in-command, Adjutant, and First Lieutenant Grants in tow, I spot the flight engineer coaxing the engine and the pilot making careful final adjustments to the autopilot system. Usually, I would have preferred for them to stay aboard until we reach our destination, but wasting such specialist technicians on a one-way flight is not within acceptable cost-benefit margins. Thus, as much as the pilots protest, the two men are being asked to disembark here. I speak frankly. Thank you for your hard work, Lieutenant. We're here to hijack your plane. Legally, of course, in accordance with military law. If you wouldn't mind handing over the control stick, I say. The pilot turns around with just his face, sighs, and shakes his head dramatically, left to right. I am Air Force First Lieutenant Hans Schultz. This plane is my baby. How can the higher-ups ask something like this of me? This transport plane is going to be abandoned. That's excessive. Enough. There's no need to drag you both down with it. Thank you for your service, but you can disembark now. Very kind, but there's no need to worry for my sake. If you don't mind, I'd rather stay aboard until the end. His tone of voice and the look in his eyes are serious. This pilot is prepared to go down with his ship. But I shake my head. To be honest, I Would love for him to come with us. But unfortunately, as a good company man, Tanya must think of the company's best interests. What, you think we can't navigate a plane? We've even got an autopilot system. All we need to do is fly it in a straight line, and if everything goes okay, we'll be at our destination before we know it. We can also make a few adjustments if need be. Besides, not to be rude, but when it comes to flying by night, we're the ones with more experience. After all, what if there's an accident? What are you going to do then? Worst case scenario, so long as we get to target airspace, we'll figure something out. Remember, the plane is going to be disposed of anyway. All the pride I took in never once getting shot down, just to lose my baby to something like this in the end. Laments the pilot, before heaving yet another massive sigh. His eyes rest on the gleaming instrumentation. It looks like he has given them a good polish as one final farewell. The pilot's face as he clutches the control stick looks like he doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. I've even given enemy fighters the slip. I can't believe this. I never imagined that in the end, it'd be my own side's barbarism that would get me. Ain't that some shit? He jokes, though undoubtedly he means part of what he says. Who wouldn't complain at seeing such well-loved tools of the trade snatched from their fingers at upper management's whims, when they were still performing so admirably? It's rare for any work to be meaningless enough to merit the firing of someone you would rather not fire. I, myself, would rather let the pro do his work and not destroy such professional tools. If this is not an example of true work, after all, what is? Why do I, of all people, have to be responsible for such waste? The least I can do is sympathize. Suppressing my own internal conflict, I extend a hand in words of consolation to the pilot, First Lieutenant Schultz. I would much prefer an elegant trip through the skies, guided by a first-rate pilot such as yourself. But orders are orders, Lieutenant. And what are the orders, exactly? I respond sadly. Why, we are to truss you up in a parachute and toss you from the plane. Those were our orders. I'm truly sorry, Lieutenant. But you'll need to hand the controls over now. Is there no way I can fly the plane instead? I understand your reluctance to let go. But this is a one-way trip. Lieutenant Schultz, we can't let a pilot, someone unable to fly on his own, get wrapped up in this. But I know this plane, I'm the best qualified to make sure you get where you're going. This is going to be its last flight. The pilot insists indignantly that he can handle the plane better than we can, showing an admirable sense of responsibility toward a salutary asset. From the viewpoint of a fellow good citizen, someone who feels similar pride and confidence in my work, I fully sympathize with First Lieutenant Schultz. I'm sorry to have brought something so unfortunate to your doorstep. But, like you, our hands are tied. Can't you overlook just one person? I can't, I confirm, shaking my head sadly. It all comes down to orders. Veteran pilots are rare. If I were to waste even one, I'm told, there would be hell to pay. How heartless. Who issued such a threat? Why, it came from the infamous ne'er-do-wells of the General Staff. Of course, but if you would like to petition the government for compensation, you have my full support. Just send the invoice to the General Staff, if you please. A sad consolation, perhaps, but at least the First Lieutenant gets to abscond from the battlefield. If it were me, I think I would celebrate. If needed, I can attach a note. General Zetor may be the type to order what is necessary, but worry not, he is not the type to categorically reject complaints. A complaint to General Zetor? Thanks, but I'd rather steer clear of the heavyweights. I'm sure he'd be happy to foist even more trouble on my shoulders, given half a chance, blurts out First Lieutenant Schultz. Although this is technically criticism of a senior officer, I decide to let it slide, as I consider that sort of talk forgivable on the front lines. Just then, however, the young officer standing next to me speaks up. What did you just say? He barks, causing me to reflexively turn his way. I'm sorry, Captain Schultz. What did you just say about General Zetor? Asks First Lieutenant Grants, glowering, as he stands and places a hand on Schultz's shoulder. The pilot continues to stare straight ahead as he responds, however, completely unfazed. I said he's a big shot who wouldn't hesitate to cause me trouble. What of it? First Lieutenant Grants instantly explodes with laughter. Ha 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 ha. Whoa, what is that reaction for? I feel exactly the same. Captain Schultz, you are absolutely correct. Once this operation is over, give me a chance to chew your ear off. I'll buy the drinks. I've got plenty of complaints of my own to share. Me, yes indeed, cries First Lieutenant Grants, bobbing his head vigorously. It's not just General Zetor, it's all those heavyweights over at the General Staff office. They're monsters. You've got the right idea. Better not to have anything to do with them at all. I'm glad to meet a fellow soul. Maybe this is a good day after all. As I watch my subordinate firmly shake the man's hand, I feel a small morsel of regret. First Lieutenant Grants is not the shy type, but perhaps he was not cut out for dealing with a senior officer like General Zetor. This must be a stress response. Despite handling things perfectly fine on the battlefield, when it comes to interpersonal relationships, there is apparently a side to Grants I hadn't expected. Lieutenant Grants, I'm surprised. A warmonger like you, I saw the way you rushed out from your cushy place at General Zetor's side just to return to the front, speaking ill of an old man like that. I tease, but first. Lieutenant Grants vehemently objects. I'm sorry, Colonel, but if I am a warmonger, then General Zetor must be the world's greatest enemy. That is not me speaking ill of him. This is just an accurate assessment. Captain Schultz responds to the first lieutenant's witty retort with enthusiasm. Well put, Lieutenant Grants. You said it, Captain. The two seem to be on the same page. They would probably get along. Thick as thieves. I, on the other hand, as their superior officer, start to wonder if I should put the brakes on my subordinate badmouthing the big shots like this. But I soon decide to let it pass. After all, everything Grants is saying is true, and one must always respect the truth. Whatever. I shrug. But it's time to wrap things up. I move to bring the derailed conversation back on track. Well, rejoice, Lieutenant Grants, as you've now been given the honor of joining that enemy of the world, General Zetor's grandest operation. Yet, turning away from the surprised First Lieutenant Grants, I address the captain gently. In any case, I'm sorry to make you miss out on all the fun, but this party is for mages only. This is discrimination against non-mages. You should feel ashamed. A very enlightened and progressive opinion. I agree wholeheartedly. By all means, make your feelings known to the higher-ups. I can sign an affidavit if necessary, but progress is gradual and takes time. Perhaps one day, things will change, but for tonight, you will have to bow out. Still gripping the control stick firmly, Captain Schultz manages to squeeze out one more stoic reply. The festivities are really for mages only, then. Indeed, a special event for our entertainment only. Not that I particularly want things that way, but as the one sponsoring this New Year's mixer with the Federation Army, General Zetor has set the rules. It's the boss's wish. A faithful employee can only comply. Now then, please disembark, and keep your ears tuned to the bases. Wireless. Perhaps you'll hear the Federation Army's rapturous welcome cries as we, and we alone, throw the finest bash this world has ever seen. I say. In response, Captain Schultz nods slowly and stands up. She's in your hands now. While she looks good on the outside, her insides are a mess. I hope you mages can navigate all right. It's going to be hard flying without a flight engineer. I wouldn't put too much stock in the engine oil or expect it to have had regular maintenance, if I were you. With respect, don't push it. I imagine it has taken much longer to build pilots capable of properly flying a machine in this state than it has to build the machine itself. You are a tiny giant. I wish you wouldn't say that, I say, shrugging with deliberate casualness. My height has proved highly convenient. Why, do you still get the kids' discount? Exactly, especially during trench and air combat, where, as a smaller target, I get a massive discount on my odds of being shot. It's a great bargain when it comes to the cost of staying alive. In any case, I say, holding a parachute toward the captain and smiling softly, it's time to say farewell. In truth, I am incredibly jealous of this captain, who gets to escape the situation. If I could have traded places with him, I would have done so on the spot, but I can't have those commies crushing the world, either. In the end, it looks like there is no choice but for Tanya to do her job. Until next time, I say, seeing the pilots off. I wish the mages luck. Thank you, Lieutenant. With a quick goodbye, the pilots jump neatly from the plane. Hoping they land safely, I speak to my second in command, who is next to me. It's almost time for the festivities, then, I say, grinning sarcastically. Although deep down I feel like I'm screwed. I wish we could at least put in for jump badges and extra pay. A humble wish. On-site personnel working to the bone like this should have the right to expect at least that much. But there is no place for even such tiny, selfish dreams within the logic of an organization. Oh, but, Colonel, under current regulations, if we put in for bonus pay for a combat drop as aerial mages, our flight qualifications would be suspended and our pay grade would decrease. What, is that true, Lieutenant Serebryakov? It is. Someone from the same class as me recently had a similar thought and was going to apply, but apparently it turned out the rules had changed. They collided headfirst with a mountain of new protocols and found themselves up the creek instead. I stare at my adjutant in shock. What? Why would the Imperial Army do something like that? Apparently, on the Rhine front, when mages were assisting the trenches, there were multiple instances of mages dropping in to fight, and the question came up in the back offices as to whether drop pay should apply. After some long deliberation, it was determined that while it had previously been provisional pay, as of the end of last year, the uniform interpretation would be that drop pay does not apply to soldiers holding mage qualification. In other words, I say to my adjutant, shocked, we essentially received a pay cut just before this airborne operation began. As Serebryakov nods, frowning, I immediately howl in response. Those heartless bastards. A one-sided decrease in our allowances, after zero negotiation with labor. Reducing costs is all well and good, but what sense does it make to pull from only the mages, when we already excel in terms of cost effectiveness? I think, suddenly feeling the vehement need to assert my rights. Hold on, I think, suddenly freezing. What do I mean, assert? If jurisprudence tells us anything, it is that rights must be protected through constant vigilance. Perhaps this is the consequence of sitting on my rights without exercising them. Now that I think of it, I was not very proactive in applying for drop pay. This may be an example of the natural extinction of the right to claim, but seeing as it was based on a change in interpretation, maybe I can submit a differing opinion. It is such a basic mistake, the sort of thing written about in textbooks. How have I allowed war to so mangle Tanya's cultural purview? I am reminded of what is truly important in life. We must not allow ourselves to pretend, like those commies, that we are working for the greater good while actually straying down a path that makes matters worse for everyone. Rights must be asserted. I write that down in big, bold letters on my mental list of things to do. But the situation within the transport plane is not so calm that I can spend my time navel-gazing about the future. Frankly, I am issuing more reminders to my subordinates in their respective pilot seats than I can count. Pilots, check your instruments. Compare them to the compass. Mages are not flight control pros, and flying an airplane is not simple work. Honestly, if these transport planes weren't equipped with autopilot systems, it's doubtful we would even be able to fly in a straight line. Yet, the higher-ups declared that as long as there were basic flight assistance systems on board, mages trained in navigation would be perfectly capable of making any necessary corrections. Unfortunately, theory and reality are not one and the same. I am quickly realizing that aerial mages actually make the worst flight crew for a plane. It isn't that we are incapable of navigation. As far as our ability to read the winds goes, we usually feel the air through protective films, so our minds surely cannot be any less up to the task than those of professional pilots. Despite this, I am forced to realize that a mage becomes useless the moment you shove a control stick into their hands. After all, mages have no experience serving as handmaidens to that tricky heart of a plane known as its engine. Don't break. Formation. Signal to plane 2. They're out of position. They're drifting too far to the side. Don't cross the nose of the plane. Behind you, I shout, urging First Lieutenant Serebryakov, who is operating the signal lamp, to act quickly, while I stare through my binoculars with cold sweat running down my face. Flying in formation is one of the most basic combat operations, or at least it should be. But apparently, for mages, flying solo and piloting a Transport plane are two entirely different beasts. With the plane behind us, drifting unsteadily, I begin to prepare for the possibility of a midair collision. This is awful. Please, for goodness sake, steady out. I watch tensely, occasionally issuing a correction, before finally managing a sigh of relief. It looks as if Plane 2 has finally managed to recover its course. Just barely, though, flying in a straight line is turning out to be quite the challenge. While I am still coming to grips with this discovery, First Lieutenant Serebryakov calls over her shoulder. What is it, Lieutenant? I'm not getting any response from force signal lamp. I think they might have fallen behind. Damn it, I sigh, poring over the night sky through my binoculars. The transport planes have been painted pitch black to reduce visibility from the ground, and conditions are relatively poor, making them hard to spot. After a time-consuming search, I finally catch sight of a dark shadow floating amid the veil of night. I frantically order a signal to be sent, feeling profound relief once we get a response. After some back and forth, it becomes apparent that plane number 4 had not even realized it had gone off course. Night flying aside, I am beginning to seriously worry whether we will actually reach enemy territory. When are we going to get there? I groan impulsively, cradling my head. All we were supposed to do was grip the control stick, get assistance from the autopilot systems, and fly straight ahead. That was the plan, at least, but paper theory and hard reality do not mix well. It turns out that flying a plane in a straight line is grueling work. Of course, the original crew warned as much, but to see word-of-mouth knowledge put into practice is a rare thing indeed. Expecting amateurs who only know navigation to pilot a plane is insane. Remind me to never do anything like this next time. I begin to perspire strangely, thinking about how the success or failure of this operation rests entirely on the success of the pilot's jump. After a moment, however, I notice Major Weiss staring at me in stunned silence. What is it? I ask. No, it's just, you mentioned it, next time, Colonel. Yes, I certainly would not want to do this a second time. I think I might refuse even if they ask. But you think such an opportunity might really come up again? Asks my second in command, trembling. Of course. Remember, Major Weiss, it is General Zetor we are talking about here. I don't doubt for a second that he would get such a thought in his head. Yes, of course, that's true, but, Colonel, aren't you worried that luck might not be on our side this time and that you might die out there? Die? What are you prattling on about, Major? Why should I waste time worrying about dying when I have no interest in doing so in the first place? That would be awfully unproductive, don't you think? There's more future in spending your time worrying about the difficult problems that will remain for us if we do survive, I say, lecturing my subordinate on the importance of forward thinking. However, I am forced to resist the urge to bite my tongue when I spot something through the binoculars. Is that Plane 6? Major, can you see it? Plane 6, the one with Warrant Officer Katyanin aboard. Yes, you're right, something looks wrong. But before Major Weiss can finish his sentence, First Lieutenant Serebryakov, in charge of communications, begins shouting a report. We're getting a relay signal from Plane 2. 6 is experiencing an engine malfunction. It looks like their batteries have died as well. Their lights are down, and the only other lights they have on hand are short range. I groan in response. You've got to be kidding me. Of course, machinery requires the hands of experts. If their flight engineer were on board, he might have been able to wrangle the finicky engine into line, but the flight engineers had already parachuted out. That means, I do the calculations in my head. Plane 6 is going to go down. Bad luck for Katyanin and bad luck for me. Major Weiss, we're going to be down one plane's worth of mages. Isn't there anything we can do to stop it from crashing? They said it's an engine failure. Maybe if you bang on it, it will just fix itself, like an orb. The idea that mana gets clogged in an orb's circuits and that, if you bang on it, the mana will come loose, is just an old wives' tale. People have been saying that since the early days. Orbs are precision machines. You know. In fact, while the Elenium Type 95 has now been stabilized, if someone had banged on one during its testing phase, it might have caused a massive explosion, a point on which the orb's designer, Dr. Schugel, has shown woefully little contrition. In fact, he used it as an excuse to complain about the orbs users instead. In any case, perhaps it does say something about the oafishness of soldiers, but a portion of aerial mages have unfortunately convinced themselves that a malfunctioning orb can occasionally be fixed by giving it a good smack. Sighing at the realization that Major Weiss is among them, I begin instructing First Lieutenant Serebryakov on corrective actions. Send a signal to Plane 6. Tell them to prioritize a safe emergency landing, and to keep their magic completely sealed until the scheduled operation start time. Once our operation begins, they are free to attempt to join us or to return to the main front. The decision is in Warrant Officer Katyanan's hands. You don't want to give them strict orders to rendezvous with us. Don't get carried away, Visha. I can't take away their freedom to advance or retreat under circumstances such as these. And besides, as unfair as it is to Warrant Officer Katyanan, his troops are mostly trainees. We can take all the help we can get, but there is no point in causing an intentional accident along the way. Better to leave the door open for the possibility that they might join us later. They should focus on avoiding detection. If they are discovered, have them prioritize retreat. Opening fire for anything other than for self-defense purposes is strictly forbidden, as is the use of the radio unless it is an emergency report. First Lieutenant Serebryakov understands. She deftly begins sending the signal at my bidding. 6 has confirmed the orders. Tell them I pray for their safety. After sending the signal and receiving their response, she interprets for my benefit. They said, good fortune in battle. The expression on her face suggests that she understands how Warrant Officer Katyanan must feel. She whispers softly, so that only I can hear. Poor Officer Katyanan. I don't know. Perhaps we're the real unlucky ones in this situation. Maybe we both feel the same in the end. The results come down to chance, I suppose. I nod, though deep down that is not how I feel. We are obviously the ones in the worst situation right now, Visha. An airborne assault led not by a battalion but by 3 whole divisions of aerial mages, the world's first large-scale, all-mage rear screening operation, is an impossible gamble that requires every transport and mage we can muster. Usually, with 3 mage divisions at your disposal, you would want to use them to hold the enemy on the front line. The nerve of General Zetor to commit us to such a massive gamble with a straight face. I just wish we would drop already. At least then we'd know that things couldn't get any worse. Every now and again, First Lieutenant Grantz's superior officer would say something he could not understand. When she muttered, sighing, that she wished they would just drop already, it took everything Grantz had, standing next to her, to resist the urge to ask if she was serious. Naturally, Grantz was an officer, just like Lieutenant Colonel Digorekaf. He knew that officers needed to put on a show in front of their subordinates. Their every move was being watched, and nothing went unnoticed. No one wanted to stake their life on someone who came off as unreliable. Maybe this was just iconoclasm, but there was nothing wrong with keeping up appearances. If Lieutenant Colonel Digorekaf were to show distress, Grantz might begin to worry they were in over their heads. The memory of General Zetor instructing him to smile during their previous campaign in Ildoa was still very vivid in his mind. He knew to take the words of higher-ups with a grain of salt. That was a given, but it was also important to sniff out the difference between a facade and true feelings, which was why he was so baffled by his superior. Lieutenant Colonel Digorekaf, at that moment, it seemed as though she might really mean what she said about wanting to hurry up and get to the battlefield already. If she had just been saying it for her subordinate's sake, she probably would have spoken more boldly. A soliloquy spoken so that no one could hear was likely her true feelings. From the perspective of a freshly appointed second lieutenant who did not understand what they were heading into, that might make sense. But, from a commander who had been informed in advance and knew the gravity of the situation, the thought made Grantz's skin crawl. The 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion was often considered a unit full of warmongers, but upon contemplation, perhaps that reputation was due to their commanding officer's personality. Indeed, Grantz considered himself observant, but the thought had never even occurred to him. As for the lieutenant colonel herself, while she was always urging her men to use more common sense and pay attention to things other than War. The moment they reached the target's vicinity, her face lit up with pure excitement. It's time. This must be target airspace. Let's confirm. Her voice was sprightly, a complete contrast to the expression she had worn throughout the journey. Grants could picture what she was feeling. The emotion was almost palpable. Now that they were over enemy territory, she looked raring to go. Not wanting to ruin her good mood, Grants pored over the map, comparing it to the features below and pointing out the landmarks he could find. I see it. There's the river, and the bridge. Major Weiss, confirm as well. I've confirmed. I'm seeing the same. Good, said Lieutenant Colonel de Garekaf, smiling now that their destination had been confirmed. She picked up the aerial radiophone used for Unit IC. All units, this is O1. All units, you now have permission to fully unseal your magic. Do you hear me? Listen closely now. Lieutenant Colonel de Garekaf shouted, her voice a sonorous roar. The work before us is simple, my fellow aerial mages. This should be a breeze. The kind of straightforward job that any mage would dream of. Yeah, a piece of cake, Grants quipped internally. They were penetrating deep into enemy territory to deliver a powerful and upsetting blow. A feat of valor, certainly, but as far as workloads go, this was clearly nothing to sneeze at. In fairness, though he might not match Lieutenant Colonel de Garekaf's zeal, he would be lying if he said he wasn't getting worked up. Take the bridge, kick the enemy's ass, and once we have them cornered, make them curse the day they were born. Simple, just the kind of job that mages are made for. As easy as it sounded, they all knew it would be hard. But these were the words they needed to hear to pump themselves up now that they were in enemy territory. Let's do it like we always do, the lieutenant colonel said briefly. Before Grants knew it, he was smiling, too. What made today any different? This was the kind of work they always did. They all knew what they were doing, they had done it plenty of times before. Why shouldn't they just do it again? Determination, bravery, grit, whatever virtues the enemy might have on their side are meaningless before our resolve. We are destiny manifest. No, this may be too mundane for destiny, for we will carve out our place in history, not with destiny, but with our own rifles, our own orbs. A great cry rose from their bellies. Before Grants knew it, he was shouting as well, his voice full of fury and eagerness to fight. Now then, gentlemen, it is time for the festivities to begin, Tanya said, nodding. You know the drill, follow after me. I have a thought. Tanya has gotten far too used to this now, jumping out of a transport plane toward the drab ground below. I loathe how even that strange, giddy feeling, as you glide weightlessly through the air after the aircraft disappears from under your feet, now feels like just another part of the job. Even the parachute on my back feels unfortunately familiar, just another tool of the trade, like a necktie. It's a rough career, indeed, the way the Imperial Army presses our noses to the grindstone. At the very least, transmit at maximum power. I say again, transmit at maximum power. Fuck it all. I let the first words that come to my mind, largely thought terminating nonsense, explode from Tanya's mouth, riding upon the radio waves of the eastern sky toward their intended ears. We are the aerial mages of the Empire. No one can stand against us. It is just wordplay, the lament of a middle manager, crushed by the impossible task before me, and unable to keep from crying out. It has no meaning, it is just a random assortment of sounds. But, for whatever reason, in the beginning was the word. Yes, that's right, words hold intention and soul. We are the aerial mages of the Empire. No one can stand against us. Joining in the chants of my men, I repeat the phrase for a third time. We are the aerial mages of the Empire. No one can stand against us. We jump from planes on a massive detour from the front, a blitzkrieg surprise drop, after which all we need to do is hold down the adjacent bridge. Initial resistance is expected to be light. On paper, at least, the job looks easy. Unfortunately, however, it is rarer for things to go as expected in more than not. One of the mages carefully assesses the area, crying out as they pick up a nearby mana signature. Enemies. An enemy mage unit is lifting off to intercept. There are mana signatures in the sky over our destination. Signatures that do not belong to us. Hey, Visha, I thought there weren't supposed to be any enemies in the area. That's correct, Colonel. According to prior intel, resistance was supposed to be light, a roundabout way of saying that there is resistance after all. When one is accustomed to war, even unexpected attacks can become familiar or, paradoxically, even expected. Both me and my wingman, Visha, are accustomed enough to absurdity to know that if the higher-ups say the coast is clear, it is almost certainly anything but. As soon as we receive multiple confirmations of enemy mage interception, I toss my parachute in midair and, understanding that we need to scatter our signatures, begin barking orders at my subordinates, who are ditching their own parachutes. Intercept. Almost as soon as I issue the order, the unit has already formed assault ranks in the air, with the exception of the new recruits, of course, who flounder about at the edges. Even at night, even mid-drop, any aerial mage who has survived the East this long could pull off such a maneuver even while hungover. Comrades, brothers in arms, they form pairs and begin accelerating toward the battle at once. However, as the very first to jump, I am also the very first to encounter the enemy. Due to this, I naturally find myself bathed in enemy fire. I am highly reluctant to serve as a shield for the new recruits, who have all jumped toward the back. Tanya has no interest in being anyone's shield. Unfortunately, that situation can't be helped. We can't afford to lose numbers so soon after commencing our operation. As a thank you card for all the fire I have just received, I activate 3 simultaneous explosion formulas, tossing them in the direction of the enemy mana signatures. May they enjoy. Listen up, men, crush the opposition. This time, we are the ones with the numbers on our side. As I deliver this spiel, the Imperial Army mages begin firing off their own finely honed formulas at their discretion. Although the Federation Army mages manage to lift off quickly, their altitude remains low, which is perfect for us, as we now have the enemy pinned down from above. My fellow attacking mages and I kick off the night's entertainment, a symphony of battle that rains down upon the enemy's heads. Before, the Imperial mages were forced to resist with inferior numbers. Now, although localized, we have secured both an advantage in numbers and altitude. Obviously, we are going to be as ferocious as possible, taking this opportunity to vent all our frustrations. The Federation Army, of course, does not just sit back and take it. These are mages assigned to the defense of an extremely important base. Mages who scrambled immediately in response to a large-scale airborne assault. They are far from amateurs. In terms of skill, coordination, and, most of all, command, they are, like us, first-class soldiers. I snort in frustration as I fly through the air. HMPH. It looks like the enemy hasn't been slacking off, either. Their movements are almost too polished. They rely entirely on the toughness of their defensive shells as they lay down heavy return fire. They avoid flying in straight lines to minimize opportunities for us to pick them off with optical sniping formulas, while ignoring the explosion formulas we use as suppressing fire. Furthermore, the majority of their return fire, though optical in nature, is scattering fire with little focus on penetration. Classic delaying tactics. Classic and organized. To make matters worse, their maneuvers seem designed to break through our advance guard and target the new recruits at the rear, making the Federation commander's intentions plain to see. It looks like they've got team play in mind. We need to take note. They've started testing paired flight. Maximize resistance while emphasizing survivability. Not bad. However, I grin. They don't have the experience yet. It is unfortunate for the Federation mages. Mark all enemies advancing into airspace. They seem to have gotten the wrong idea about what a head-on air collision with aerial mage tactics entails. Let's teach them that as long as you can maintain numbers and control, it is better to form a line than a point. In addition to our advantage in numbers, we also happen to be masters of organized combat maneuvers, to a terrifying degree. Finely honed as instruments of violence under the guidance of a commander well versed in the now almost endangered large-scale suppression tactics of the Rhine front, we stand ahead of the rest of the world. In truth, the only time a large-scale aerial mage battle has ever been carried out was on the Rhine front. Tanya herself cut her teeth on the Rhine. Oh, the Rhine. As abominable as it was, that experience is now in Tanya's blood. Had I ever really escaped it? Even now, the days spent sleeping like death itself in the mud of the trenches or crawling out from bunkers on interception runs feel as if they happened only yesterday, or even today. Hence, in Federation skies, I feel relatively sure of our comparative superiority. For better or for worse, the Federation army mages are disciplined, and their formation is strong. To be blunt, it looks like the Federation army has raised its standard for mage units. However, in this battlefield, at this moment, at least, we've already paid our enrollment fee to that teacher known as experience. We have paid it in blood. Until they pay a similar fee, they've got a long way to go before they reach our level. Those commies are always so keen on addressing disparities. Well, as the adults in the room, let us extend a helping hand. It all comes down to one thing. The Federation doesn't yet understand what a large-scale aerial mage battle really entails. They lack the kind of know-how that the Empire has cribbed from the shoulders of cataclysmic loss. And now, even if they do catch up someday, even if the future is inevitable, they are going to pay the price for what they do not know. Just for today, let's give them an extensive lesson on what they missed out on at the Rhine. Yes, for now, the Empire's experience still takes the day. I chuckle, inwardly, have to persuade myself. One last time, allow me to demonstrate for the history books why I was once dubbed the Devil of the Rhine. It was a nightmare. Since then, the Federation Army 153rd Aerial Mage Regiment had only been able to refer to that night in passing. The first report was nothing remarkable, a wide area call from Air Defense Control. A frontline unit has spotted multiple aircraft, likely enemy heavy bombers. Aircraft models and detailed flight courses remain unclear. They appear to be flying with a company toward the rear of our combat zone. The Federation Army had long since prepared for the possibility of a counterattack by the Imperial Air Fleet in response to their massive push. The on-duty personnel grimaced in unison. I'd hate to be whoever runs into them. The Empire was sly, giving the men cause to sympathize with whoever might face bombing. Of course, as a key transportation hub, the possibility that the bombs could come their way was not entirely out of the question. Though, given the inaccuracy of nighttime bombings, such an attack would likely amount to little more than harassment. Regardless, the young duty officer, a major crammed into the Mage Regiment's Operations Center, was taking no chances. In fact, the entire regiment was on high alert. At any rate, searchlights had been checked and anti-aircraft guns were in place if needed. They weren't just ready on paper, they were fully prepared to execute an actual interception. The duty officer was also capable. Despite his young age, he possessed a certain while more associated with experience. It was the vigilance of an aerial mage that had convinced the entire unit of the possibility of an airborne assault on the rear lines. Considering the tricks the Empire was known for, the duty officer was not taking any chances. He immediately put in a report by phone to the grumpy regimental commander, who was currently buried beneath administrative work in his office. After conveying several points, the commander, concerned, asked the officer, "Is there a mana signature?" Unfortunately, the major's knowledge of enemy positions at that time was accurate. None, and the Imperial Army mages who have been relentlessly harassing our logistic lines have only just finally pulled back. "Thank you," answered the commander, before putting down the phone and turning his weary attention back toward the pile of paperwork and letters forming a mountain on his desk. According to the commander, Colonel Sergei, the harsh demands of a mage regiment on its commanders were threefold. A regimental commander must fly, do desk work, and command. Preventing overwork was impossible. As a regimental commander, he did not have time to deal with every heavy bomber that appeared. However, he still made every effort to ensure the duty officers never felt unable to report anything. That effort must have paid off, because the duty officer soon contacted him again with another urgent report. As Sergei received the report in his private office, gripping the receiver, he muttered in shock. An airborne assault by a strong division of enemy aerial mages. And you're telling me it's targeting 2nd Area Army Command? That can't be, he thought in dismay, but he crossed his arms and tried to set aside his awe at the unexpected scale of the enemy. We expected the possibility of decapitation tactics, we've stayed on our guard, but a division? Seriously, he muttered again in disbelief, cradling his head as a new headache surfaced. For better or worse, the world at large knew that, even among aerial mages, the empires were particularly cunning and strong in combat. A whole division, how did they even come up with such numbers? Imperial mages were strong. In one-on-one combat, hastily formed, rookies stood no chance against an Imperial mage. But an exhausted mage could still be beaten if handled in pairs. Indeed, Sergei and his men had often leveraged their numerical advantage when facing Imperial mages. Very rarely had their tactics been thwarted by a named enemy. In general, their numerical advantage was unshakable. Sergei was convinced of this. And yet, after hassling our supply lines recently with a full mage division, they are now launching an airborne screening attack in our rear. With yet another division. Where are they getting these numbers from? It was a reasonable question. After all, who would imagine that a mere lieutenant colonel could single-handedly falsify orders, scrape together literally every last mage in the east, abandon the front, and now careen eyes red toward the Federation's rear? What is happening? I heard the mages had all been redeployed to Ildoa. They're popping up now like fruit flies. A fearful image began to form in Sergei's mind. There is no more room for doubt. This is a strategic counteroffensive. They began by hammering vital logistic lines just as we started to advance, groaned Colonel Sergei. Now, on top of that, they have sent in a whole division of mages to hit us here at 2nd Area Army Command. What in the hell is happening? This is why I hate Imperials. How can one country do so much against the entire world? Sergei was tempted to moan aloud. A concentrated deployment. He didn't understand what was happening at all, but he pushed those feelings aside, frowning. Yes, we were on guard for an airborne attack from the enemy, but because we misjudged the scale of it, our mage units have already been dispersed to multiple positions. Under these circumstances, should we try to reassemble quickly? They had already located the enemy mage division's position. Shouldn't they switch all units to ready status immediately? As in, this very minute. Colonel Sergei did not hesitate. Let's not take any chances. Have all units prepared to mobilize to assist 2nd Area Army Command if needed, and contact our comrade political officer. This should be reported to our superiors in both our names as quickly as possible. The colonel was very good at his job. His professionalism and flexible ability to respond would have been an eye-opener for anyone who believed that the Federation Army was just a pack of dunderheads relying on numbers as a crutch. Luck, however, was not on the Federation Army 153rd Aerial Mage Regiment's side. As soon as the first negative reports came in, the regimental commander assumed the worst. The political officer did not interfere. In fact, they both agreed that the men should assume battle positions so that they would be ready to move the moment the order came from higher command. They assigned more mages than usual to be ready to scramble. In this unit, even the political officer, usually the one to squash what was seen as overreaction from a commander, happened to be a faithful and highly capable model communist who recognized the military rationale of the commander's steps. A good comrade and good neighbor. He was a rare, new type of person, trustworthy from the heart, a socialist of exemplary character who held no prejudice against mages. In other words, an upstanding, beloved political officer. How rare was this? Let us just say it was nearly miraculous. The men and women of the Federation's 153rd Aerial Mage Regiment were typical mages, accustomed to persecution due to the vagaries of ideology and politics. Naturally, they had not gelled well with the party's ranks. It was uncommon for someone to come along who could cause such soldiers to admit that there might occasionally be a decent person or two in the party. But this political officer had done exactly that, and the unit welcomed him as a comrade in arms, relying on his knowledge as an advisor, and building up the kind of relationship that allowed them to implement decisive measures when necessary. The Federation Army's 153rd Aerial Mage Regiment had forged connections that allowed them to pride themselves on being comrades. Family. Each individual did what needed to be done. So naturally, upon learning of the measures being taken, the political officer ratified them as usual and, seeing there was a chance that leave might be cancelled, rushed away to inform the mages that the deadline for letters might be moved up. They were at war. In the heat of the moment, it was easy to forget to send tidings to one's family when time permitted. The political officer did. The rounds, reminding everyone to hurry, and also that mail might not be reaching them from the other direction. As inflexible as military post could be, it served an essential function in maintaining bonds between units and bringing individuals together. The political officer, a thoughtful, empathetic member of the Communist Party, considered such minor adjustments and requests part of his job, and prided himself on personally seeing that they got done. He was a communist with a human face, a person everyone liked. Do what needs to be done, prepare what needs to be prepared, and trust in one another. The men considered themselves truly fortunate to have been assigned to the 153rd Aerial Mage Regiment. As a result, they were able to prepare quickly. And why shouldn't they? They were told a storm was coming, so it was time to get ready for the storm. They truly were a sight to behold, but this was also exactly what made them so unfortunate. They were too dedicated to their work. The vigilant on-duty lookouts were the first in the entire Federation Army to actually notice the airborne operation unfolding. As a result, whether fortunate or not, when the Devil of the Rhine dropped into the vicinity they were responsible for, they were able to pick up the mana signatures and realize that something had just landed on their doorsteps. Warning, we're getting multiple mana signatures. Wait, this is bad. There are strong mana signatures throughout the entire region. There are too many to match against the library. We can't keep up. It had to be a division, at the very least. With multiple signatures suddenly detected, panic descended upon the staff, although a few still had enough presence of mind to consider the possibility of electronic warfare and question whether the signals could be decoys. See, could they be dummy signals? This isn't possible. Reconfirm. That can't be. An enemy division has already appeared on top of 2nd Area Army Command. But what other explanation is there? A division is supposed to be the absolute limit of what the Empire can muster in the East right now. But an apparent division has already been confirmed. There's no mistake. The other unit is another division, at least. They're all mages. There's more. The signal detector is already saturated. A degree of confusion began to spread throughout the operations center, but for the duty officer in charge, there was only one thing to do as a person who considered it his duty to take necessary measures, even at his own discretion and responsibility. Everyone, calm down. But, comrade, the mages, please calm down, comrades. The necessary course of action is already clear, is it not? After pursing his lips for a moment, the duty officer stood up as if he had made a decision. Switch all units on standby alert to airborne alert. Lift off. Immediately. Remaining personnel, prepare all hands for departure. Inform Army Command that we are ready for an immediate response. Do it, now, gentlemen, immediately. You understood. Orderly. I'm sorry to ask, but please report the situation to the regimental commander and the political officer immediately. Move as fast as you can. The reason for the duty officer's haste was simple. An aerial force is most fragile while sitting on the ground in standby mode. Even if they are inside bunkers, it is all a matter of degrees. The more experienced a soldier is, the more that lesson has been hammered into their skull by the expensive and ferocious teacher known as experience. As soon as the massive enemy mana signal was detected, the duty officer, despite not being the regiment's commander, took matters into his own hands. Usually, such a thing would not have been possible, but he had faith that the political officer and the regimental commander would not hesitate to ratify a correct decision. From a purely military perspective, this decision, made possible only by the unit's comradeship and iron bonds of trust, was an admirable display. When those at the top stand firm, the bottom does not waver. The on-duty guards joined the responding telegraph personnel, analyzing the mana signatures they had just detected in an attempt to bring clarity to the murky fog of battle. Check for the possibility that a named could be increasing power and making dummy signals. What's the status on wavelengths? Check. Faster. Compare it with radar. If it's an airborne attack, they should be in formation. Pay attention to ground troop communications. If there's been contact, there should be reports of engagement. Despite the clamor, the voice of a guard echoed clearly throughout the room. Comrade Regimental Commander is now entering the room. The soldiers stood as one and saluted. Colonel Sergei quickly returned the salute, saying what any down-to-earth field officer would in such a situation. Back to your duties. The men all returned to their work while Sergei, as commander, briefly questioned the duty officer on the situation. "I'm sorry it took me so long. Major, what's the status? It looks like the enemy is serious. It's hard to believe, but we're picking up multiple MANA signatures in addition to the ones near 2nd Area Army Command." That was when Colonel Sergei received the worst news yet. "We haven't been able to ascertain the scale, but there appears to be at least a division of mages possibly targeting the nearby Baruch Bridge. Could they be decoy signatures? We're looking into it, but it seems that at least a division's worth is probably real. In other words, those damned Imperials still have enough breathing room to project, at the very least, 2 divisions for airborne operations." Sergei was just about to groan that things couldn't get any worse when an unseen voice interjected, insisting that, in fact, they could. "Alert! We're getting an all-directions request for assistance from Nork Station. The holding garrison is under attack by a powerful aerial mage unit and is on the verge of being routed. First it was 2nd Area Army Command and Baruch Bridge, and now a third attack at Nork Station, which was an impressive junction with plenty of shunting yards and material stockpiles. A whole airborne division at Nork. Communications are going crazy. We're getting requests for relief, as soon as possible. Are there any orders from High Command? It's no good, there's too much chaos." Sergei couldn't suppress a groan as he sat in his chair. 3 divisions, how can this be?" he murmured without noticing the words slipping from his mouth. Fortunately, as commander, he managed to mask his shock. Had he not been worried about causing a scene, he probably would have screamed. Impossible. Nork Station, as well. Not just 2nd Area Army Command and Baruch Bridge. 3 whole divisions of mages. That shouldn't have been possible. The Federation had executed a strategic surprise attack, and now 3 whole mage divisions were dropping deep into Federation territory. As Sergei stared at the map, half bewildered, he suddenly froze. 3 key locations. 3 possible choke points. 3. Such a widespread attack was incredibly similar to another airborne operation the Imperial Army had once carried out in the past. It can't be. They can't be pulling the same stunt, can they?" Sergei shouted, almost screaming. The others in the room were left speechless as they glanced at the map. A thin, curved line revealed the bitter pill, the same trickery the Empire had pulled before, cutting off supplies via airborne attack, diverting the main force to deliver a counterpunch. The Imperial Army had already done this. They're targeting our choke points. How can they, at such a scale? The railway junction, the lifeline across the Great River, and the area command that had been deployed solely to oversee these key locations. If they were planning an attack against all 3, with an even bigger airborne force than last time, transfer of command from 2nd Area Army Command to all currently deployed aerial mages has just been announced by 1st Area Army Command. Nork Station has been seized. The friendly holding garrison has been routed. I say again, the Nork Station garrison has been routed. The Baruch Bridge holding garrison and the 121st Aerial Mage Regiment are still alive and well. The 121st is currently engaged in air defense. The Imperial Mage Regiment is extremely powerful, but we are still resisting. Nork had fallen, and 2nd Area Army Command had gone dark, but Baruch Bridge still stood. In that case, Sergei made an independent decision. The decision of an exemplary officer, perhaps. 153rd Aerial Mage Regiment, prepare to sortie. We are coming to Baruch's aid. He did not hesitate. He was only doing what needed to be done, when it needed to be done. As far as dedication to one's duties went, Colonel Sergei was unmatched. The sad fact, however, was that in war, survival rates and goodness of character are not directly proportional. This harsh reality, destined to bring tears and mourning to loved ones awaiting their return, was not in the men's minds as they lifted off that day. All that mattered to them was the urgent desire to help their fellow soldiers. They rose into the air and formed ranks in the sky. Sergei himself led at the front of a battalion ready to deploy immediately. The troops that followed formed ranks in quick succession, joining at near combat speed. The Federation Army's 153rd Aerial Mage Regiment cut through the dim night sky, gallantly flying in a straight course toward Baruch Bridge. They raced to meet the enemy. That was when they heard it. We are the aerial mages of the Empire. No one can stand against us. A fierce roar chanted in Imperial, like they wanted every ear to hear them, far and wide. What was that? What are the Imperials shouting? The men seemed to ask, exchanging glances. It was in Imperial and didn't make any sense. Until one of the communications personnel, his voice strained, explained. They're bragging. They said, we are the aerial mages of the Empire. No one can stand against us. Maybe it was meant to disrupt communications. Sergei shrugged lightly. The larger the bark, the smaller the bite, he said with a laugh meant to display his mettle. Whatever the chant was about, it had helped his unit relax. Sergei and his mages knew full well that letting the enemy get into your head was a surefire way to lose before the fight even began. However, while they understood the threat posed by fear, the men also processed the implicit level of danger. If the colonel felt it necessary to put on such a show, then the threat must be real. I see them. It's the 121st Aerial Mage Regiment. They're, a soldier began to announce what should have been good news, but his voice withered. What is it? Sergei demanded. Comrade Sergei, I can't believe this. Is that really all that's left of the regiment? The soldier's words confirmed Sergei's worst fears. He turned his eyes doubtfully in the direction indicated. In the darkness, the young soldier's vision was sharper than his own. After much straining and eventually the use of a formula, Sergei finally spotted the unit. He was speechless. Their friendly forces were down there. But after facing heavy fire, what should have been a regiment had been reduced to the remnants of a battalion at best. And the Imperial troops were still cruising arrogantly overhead. They had lost. The 121st Aerial Mage Regiment had lost. Sergei immediately upped his assessment of the enemy's threat, yet he raised his voice, still committed to saving their fellow soldiers. We're here. The 153rd is here. Comrades, we will take it from here. Having engaged the regiment of Federation Army soldiers in battle and thinned them down in short order to about the size of a battalion, I, as an Imperial commander, now feel as low as I can get. After all, while it is true that we have a division against what is merely a regiment of enemies, and we have managed to thin them out, progress is frustratingly slow. There are several reasons for this. First of all, even I am finding it difficult to lead these troops, scraped together on the fly and showing almost no capacity for coordination. In particular, the stark difference in skill makes free maneuvering a challenge. Secondly, providing control for an entire division is turning out to be demanding. Usually you would expect to have a dedicated controller. After all, to move a whole division, we could use a dedicated officer. Officers and soldiers on the front lines, fed up with being dictated to by some shirt-sitter in the rear, might not realize it, but there is a reason that specialists are so important. I am still trying my hand at being an airborne controller when my adjutant drops yet another depressing piece of information into my lap. Colonel, we've got visitors, First Lieutenant Serebryakov reports. Shifting my attention to scouting and detection, I see that she is right. Multiple mana signatures are approaching at rapid speed. They seem to be regiment-sized and moving at combat speed. For Federation mages, they look fairly agile. HMPH. The water is churning today. Just when we thought we had defeated one regiment, another appears. This is getting tedious. I think for a moment. I wanted to take the bridge without damaging it. If only to give the enemy the illusion that they might retake it nearly unscathed. But at the moment, we have no choice but to prioritize suppression. Besides, focusing solely on blasting the base's opposition wouldn't be a bad use of a unit of largely new recruits. With defensive shells deployed and explosion formulas manifesting, mages can be used in a manner similar to human tanks when needed. Skill levels won't come into question as severely if we utilize them in that semi-Federation style. Whether new recruits or not, collateral damage is still collateral. It is better to land a regiment of them immediately. Having made up my mind, I begin barking orders. 3rd Regiment, land, advance to capture the bridge. Everyone else, provide top cover with me. Salamander can take care of welcoming the approaching mages. Shall we? My adjutant says enthusiastically. I grin and nod. Let's go, Lieutenant. Yes, ma'am. Very good, I say as I take the lead at the front. Gentlemen, time to cut into their ranks. Let's teach those feds how to dance. Being positioned at the front of a formation means that one's mana signature particularly stood out. After confirming the enemy commanders' Signature, and almost out of habit, checking for a match, Sergei unintentionally burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, Colonel, this was the last signature he wanted to encounter, a monster he had seen far too often. The Commissariat for Internal Affairs, frantic about hunting Imperial mages, had repeatedly urged to report any sightings immediately. For Colonel Sergei and most of the mages in the Alliance, knowing that someone like that was lurking, ready to ambush as their army advanced, weighed heavily on their minds. Shit, whispered Colonel Sergei softly, his true feelings slipping free. He would have screamed if he could. The devil of the Rhine. I thought she was supposed to be in Ildoa. The Commissariat for Internal Affairs was certain, he had even guaranteed it. If it had merely been a blunder on the secret police's part, Colonel Sergei would have cursed them and moved on. But this is exactly why I hate the secret police. As far as Colonel Sergei knew, the Commissariat for Internal Affairs, those tasked with counter-mage intelligence, were gluttons for work. Their information on enemy mages was almost always accurate and up-to-date, and their analyses extremely objective. To be blunt, even though they were secret police, they were thoroughly helpful and had a strong awareness of their supporting role. Would they really make a mistake when it comes to the devil? Commander, it's the devil of the Rhine, Sergei said, pointing in the direction of the enemy signature. It looks like these enemies are the Empire's fire breathing lizards. That's bad, isn't it? I guess we've been lucky not to run into them earlier. Indeed, Sergei agreed, but now they had to face them. As a regiment, with inferior numbers against a waiting enemy, this was a nightmare. Damn it, this night is turning out to be the worst. I can't disagree there. They cursed and sucked their teeth. And, though it wasn't truly allowed, since atheism was now orthodoxy in the Communist Party platform, they also prayed to God. Then, with steadfast resolve, the mages of the 153rd Regiment dared to attack the Imperial mages. The 153rd were brave, knowing that the Baruch Bridge garrison was barely holding on and doing all it could to assist them. Imagining what would happen to the front line if this vital supply route were cut off spurred them to keep fighting, despite the enemy's might and despite their own desire to flee. But if willpower alone could win a battle, the world would be ruled by fanatics. Belief alone had yet to conquer a battlefield. Strategy still reigned. The Federation Army's 153rd Aerial Mage Regiment clashed violently with a division of Imperial mages. And the division, powerful, uncaring, and elite, absolutely clobbered them. There was no malice, no ill will, not even a scrap of hatred, just the terrifying precision of professionals calmly executing their work. These good men and women, who loved their homeland, were simply confronted with an uncertain reality. On the Empire's side, Tanya cried out triumphantly, "Can a regiment defeat a division? It's simple arithmetic, my fellow mages, knock them out of the sky, and then we can raise a cheer." During the fierce fighting, the Imperial mages corralled the already engaged battalion like a living animal, and, as the battalion realized too late that they were too entangled to withdraw, the surrounding area was transformed into a hornet's nest of overlapping fire. Either that or, by letting them believe they had broken through, they were lured even farther in. When the Federation mages charged forward at full speed to take out their new recruits, they instead encountered optical formula decoys. While the enemy continued to fire into thin air, their flank got lit up. Ultimately, it was the Empire's mages who had the advantage in the ridiculously close-range air battles that can only happen between mages. Thanks to their experience and know-how, veteran mages flew in pairs, magic blades out as they cut into the enemy battalion's ranks, even releasing explosion formulas at close range. While the enemy hesitated to shoot, there was no need to break their defensive shells. Merely disturbing their balance was enough. If the Federation mages could be intimidated right as the magic blade lunged forward, the fight was as good as over. The Imperial mages weren't just operating as disparate pairs, either. They were sweeping through the Federation ranks with obvious coordination. The unit's experience spoke volumes. Prepare for close combat. The enemy isn't used to fighting at this distance, moving in and out, swapping places, and providing constant mutual support. The Federation mages didn't stand a chance. The Imperial mages were able to overwhelm them without overexerting themselves, using just the right amount of effort. This was the privilege of Superior numbers. Although it may be localized, in this sky, at this moment, the Imperial Army was exercising that sweet privilege, and Tanya knew better than to neglect her claims as an aggressive enforcer of her rights. We are the aerial mages of the Empire. No one can stand against us. Magic bullets flew through the air, mages scattered, blood splattered on the accumulated white fields of snow, and fresh victims fell from the sky. For once, today, the sky belonged to the Empire. For today, at least, as the Federation army desperately attempted to defend, the scales dipped onto the Empire's side. And thus, 3 Imperial aerial mage divisions descended upon 3 Federation army chokepoints. They had done it. They had descended. They were the people of the Empire.